Hello, this is day three of my reading practice. I practice this for about 30 minutes every single day. So let's start. 17. I can keep up with other people's progress. There is a major problem in comparing ourselves to others. The others would think have it so easy, only let us see what they decide to reveal about themselves. When they share their stories and fail to share details about any bumps they've encountered on their journeys, it can seem like they have it easy and are much smarter than we are. That we are puny in comparison to such immense giants. Every successful language learner has had many challenges, failures, and frustrations along the road to fluency and beyond. If someone ever thinks I had it easy, I like to remind that person that I barely passed German in school. Couldn't speak Spanish despite living there for 6 months, and could barely string together even the most basic sentences in Irish, even after 10 years of schooling. Each language I've taken on has presented me with new challenges, and the same is true for every other successful language learner. We all face our own challenges. Successful language learners continue on despite the challenges. That's the difference. When you come to a challenge, rather than thinking, I might as well give up, because that successful language learner didn't have to deal with this. Ask yourself, what would that successful language learner do to get around this challenge if faced with it? You may be surprised to find out that this person faced a very similar, if not the same, challenge at some point in the past. And even if he or she didn't, many other ultimately successful learners have. If you tried to learn 18, failure begets failure. If you've tried to learn a language before and fail, then you might have concluded you're bad at language learning. I'm hoping the points I've made so far are emphasizing how untrue this is. The much more logical conclusion is that you were learning the language in a way that was wrong for you. There is no one true or perfect approach to language learning that is universally applicable to everyone. The traditional academic approach, which so many of us have passed through, simply does not work for many learners. Then again, there are those who have successfully learned with that approach. It's not that there are smart and dumb learners or universally good and bad learning systems, but there are systems that work well for particular people and many systems that may work poorly for others. The trick is to experiment and see what works for you. You may try something that doesn't produce results for you, and if that's the case, discard it and try something else. Try a few of the suggestions in this book and see if they work for you. If they don't, that's okay. Experiment with alternative language learning techniques online, many of which I'll be discussing and providing links to in chapter summaries. From this, you can come up with your own ways to learn. The trick is to keep trying until you find a way that produces real results for you. It's never you who's broken, but your current approach. Fix the approach, discard what doesn't work, and you will be much more successful. However, sometimes the issue isn't a general one with a one-size-fits-all solution, but a specific problem with the language you are learning. Should you learn an Arabic dialect or MSA? Where can you find good resources for learning the Irish language? Why does this language have to have masculine and feminine or neuter and common, etc. nouns? What's the deal with putting the letter A before every person's name or reference to them in certain Spanish sentences? These kinds of specific language questions are challenges that may slow you down, but there are always answers. I cover a few points about individual languages in Chapter 6, though I barely scratched the surface. But if you run into an issue with your language, just ask someone about it. Not all answers are covered in books. Sometimes another person with experience in the language can give you a whole new perspective on that issue. For instance, you can ask a question about pretty much any issue in the very active Fluent in 3 months online forum, fee3m.com/forum, where I or another active language learner will give you some suggestions. Otherwise, find a helpful native speaker and ask that person directly. Most questions do have an answer. Sometimes you can find that answer quickly enough in a book or web-based language course, but you always get the best, most useful answer by asking a human being. 19. Once I forget a language, I can't relearn it. People who used to speak a different language when they were young but never fully picked it up often feel they let a golden opportunity slip through their fingers. But it's really just a case of rebooting their efforts and starting fresh with that language until they get it back. One of my blog readers, Anna Porter, shared her inspirational story with us. Born and raised in England, she grew up with a Czech. She grew up with a Czech mother and a Slovak father, so she should have grown up trilingual, right? Not quite. She spoke Czech up until the age of 4 and then stopped speaking it when she entered school. Her mother would speak to her in Czech and she replied in English, but until her mother eventually stopped trying to communicate with her daughter in her native tongue. Finally, when Anna went to university, she decided to reboot her efforts with Czech. She really enjoyed it, and it helped her realize all the aspects of Czech she didn't know. She had assumed the Czech part of her brain had been somehow locked away in her mind. After graduation, she moved to Prague with the aim of learning to speak Czech. This was a pretty vague aim for her, but soon after arriving in Prague, she found my blog and my constant nudges for people to just speak the language. Despite any mistakes, she had been looking for a magic solution to her problem for years, but now she needed to put in the work. So one day she decided to stop overanalyzing things and just start speaking Czech with her mother. It was hard and she was so scared that her mother would criticize her mistakes, but to her surprise, her mother explained, "Wow, your Czech is almost perfect. This was really amazing. We've just had a real fluent conversation together." Anna's Czech wasn't quite perfect, but her mother's word in Czech meant so much to her that she almost cried. It was like having a huge weight of childhood trauma lifted. She continues improving her Czech, but she's learned that it's never too late to get into a language. And she will strive for fluency while being proud of the fact that she has already achieved her main goal of being able to truly converse with her mother. 20. Disabilities make it impossible to learn a new language. This is a rough one because it can be frustrating when we have unfairly been dealt a real, medically confirmed disadvantage as language learners. When this issue comes up, I'm reminded of Julie Ferguson's story. Julie is severely deaf and partially blind. Despite this, incredibly, she has still managed to learn 5 languages as well as the basics of several others. Her parents realized that she had a hearing problem when she was 2 years old. She had to go to speech therapy and had difficulty producing consonants like S, H, and F. Over the years, she has learned to get around her hearing difficulties by lip reading and extrapolating from what she does hear. When her older brother, who has the same condition she does, started high school, she became aware of foreign languages and was really excited to get started on them herself. She turned up to her first French class with glee, but she finished it in a flood of tears. Her teacher didn't know about her hearing problem, and the lesson had been given entirely as an oral one with no written cues. Since then, though, Julie has learned to always ask for new words to be written down for her. Despite this bad start, Julie went on to study French for 4 years in high school plus 1 year in university. She also took 3 years of Spanish. She would shine at the written word in both languages, but listening was her sticking point. Since her brother had gone down the same path ahead of her, she found out that she could request both her French and Spanish listening examinations be done with a real person reading the script to her, which allowed her to lip read as well as listen. Her teachers in school were otherwise very encouraging and supportive, and she ended up winning prizes for being the best French and Spanish student in her 4th year. During university, she had the chance to study for a year in Sweden. She made sure that her teacher knew about her hearing problems from the start, and she was now much more confident about asking for things to be repeated or written down. She also grew more confident about using Swedish in front of others without much embarrassment. By the end of university, she had learned 3 languages. Since then, she has studied basic Gaelic and even recently started learning Japanese. In just a few months, despite how difficult her condition makes it for her, she learned the meaning of hundreds of kanji, Japanese characters, and even started speaking Japanese. Julie is a true testament to the idea that there are no limits to what a motivated person can achieve. She has haggled for French books in a street market in French. She has shopped for tea in Sweden and even used her Swedish to hack Norwegian and Danish while traveling in Norway and Denmark. Her passion for language learning has also meant that she has reserved restaurant tables in Italian, bought coffee in Greek, and spent over half an hour discussing in Spanish the state of the world with a little old lady in Barcelona. Rather than live up to people's stereotypes of how she should live her life, she has been the one helping others during her travels, translating for other students, friends, and even teachers, as they were too afraid to do it or hadn't learned the language themselves. Most myths are just excuses. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Language learning is a mentally challenging endeavor. As such, if we are sure we can, then we lose our motivation, our passion dwindles, our pessimism takes over, and we simply won't learn the language. This is not due to any reason we give, but our devotion to that reason. I hope you see from the previous stories that no matter what challenges you face, someone else has gone through the same or much worse. If Julie has the courage to take on so many languages, then how can you fall back on such weak excuses as being too busy or not having a language gene? The truth is that passion will get you through every problem if you are serious about learning a language. There is no excuse good enough to justify not being able to learn a language. If you didn't find the reason holding you back among the 20 I listed, however, you may in fact have an entire chapter dedicated to it later. And if you are still in doubt about a particular setback that prevents you from learning a language, check out fee3m.com ch-1 and find an even longer version of this list. Watch some inspiring videos and read stories from other struggling language learners and suggestions on where you can go for language advice. No matter what problem you may be facing, someone before you has had the same problem, yet has learned the target language regardless. Momentum is essential to both beginning and maintaining good progress in language learning. which is why wanted to start by clearing these major hurdles. Too many language learners focus on the content of a language and on finding the right courses, but even those who have great language learning tools and strategies are still at a disadvantage if they don't clear these hurdles first. Now that we've got the right attitude and extinguish as many excuses as possible, we can charge into this language learning project with much greater momentum. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, do away with vague daydreams such as learn Spanish by setting specific end goals within specific time frames and incorporating new language learning techniques to achieve concrete results. The most common time of the year by far to decide to take on a new language is of course January the 1st, as part of a New Year's resolution. Generally, the resolution is something along the lines of learn Spanish or whatever language it may be within a year. Unfortunately, many fail miserably. This is precisely why I recommend you pick a specific target with a specific deadline for your language learning project. I don't have resolutions, I have missions. The word mission even has a sense of urgency and requires a plan of action beyond what simply promising yourself ever could. Having watched probably too many action movies and TV shows while growing up, I like to add a little drama to otherwise mundane tasks. And the concept of a mission to be completed against a ticking clock makes it seem much more exciting. This brings us to the title of this book, Fluent in 3 Months. The point is not that you have to aim for fluency in 3 months, but that you do need to be specific about what you're aiming for. And this title is one such example of a very specific target and a deadline to reach it by. Successful language learners are those who are as specific as possible with their goals. I got it. To help you gauge what to aim for, I'll dive into what fluency and other useful targets really mean, and we'll look at how much time you need to reach those targets. Plus, I'll explain why Fluent in 3 Months has been a great goal for me personally and why fluency and beyond is a goal more of us can strive for. What fluency isn't. The question of what fluency means is one of great controversy, depending on whom you ask. I want to provide a much more precise understanding of fluency one and for all. First, some definition can be way too loose. A monolingual novice with text to no language learning experience may ask me which languages I speak fluently, but before I quantify my answer, I will ask for her understanding of the idea of fluency, because her definition may be more what I consider that of a functional tourist, a level easily achievable by anyone within a few hours or days and not fluency at all. Second, there is sometimes a too elitist way of looking at being fluent, or saying that you speak a language as being equivalent to a native speaker in all ways. People who look at fluency this way sometimes go overboard and demand that you should be able to participate in a debate on a complex or philosophical topic, speak with no hesitations, use complex vocabulary and advanced expressions, never have any serious miscommunications, and be able to participate in a discussion that any typical native might have. The problem here, though, is that if you have such high criteria for fluency, then I have to confess I'm not fluent even in English, my native language. I can't participate in a debate on many complex topics, including philosophical ones. It's just not my forte. I hesitate all the time in English. Watch any unscripted video of me speaking speaking English online, and you'll hear plenty of ums and uhs. I'm not the kind of person to use pompous. What? How do you pronounce this actually? Pompous. Is it pompous? I don't know. Let's find out here. Okay, let's find out how to pronounce these words. This is taking so long. Why is this taking so long? Yeah, got it. The internet is like crazy, man. Pompous. So I made a mistake. So I was wrong. Pompous. It's not pompous, pompous. Pompous. I'm not the kind of person to use pompous vocabulary in everyday conversations or even informal ones, and because I'm Irish, I've had to learn to adjust the way I speak and the words I use whenever I'm with Americans or other foreign native English speakers. Finally, I can't participate in any conversation a typical native might have. If you start talking soccer or any sport for that matter, which I don't follow, you'll lose me quickly. Many guys can talk sports for hours, but I'm just not that interested, so I can't join in. If you start talking about nice, fashionable clothes, which many native English-speaking women can do fine, I'm a dunce. What is this? Dunce, really?
Dunce.
Okay. It's a new word for me. And can contribute. I almost never watch TV in English anymore. So if you start talking about the latest show everyone is crazy for, I'm going to be able to offer nothing more than defeated shrugs. These aren't necessarily complex conversations, and they are conversation many typical natives with no specialization or advanced studies can participate in. But I can't because I'm not either interested in or familiar with the topics. So if you had these criteria for fluency in the past, discard them immediately because this is effectively saying that you have to be able to do in your target language what you can't even do in your native language, which is a totally unfair and unrealistic standard to set for yourself. What fluency is, let's look at a more formal definition. Let's look at a more formal definition from the Oxford English Dictionary. Fluent, adjective, of a person able to express oneself easily and articulately, able to speak or write a particular foreign language easily and accurately, of a foreign language spoken accurately and with facility. I don't see any implication here that you have to pass yourself off as a native speaker or never make mistakes. Speaking a language accurately and with facility is precisely what I have in mind when I aim for fluency. However, this is not something you will ever get a consensus on. There is no absolute discernible point you pass when you can say, no, I speak the language fluently. It's like the idea of beauty in that way. You can have more of it, but there is no threshold you finally cross that signals you have arrived. It's all relative. This is a problem if we want something distinct to aim for, though, and even if we each came up with a personal understanding of what feels accurate or good enough, because we are all filled with bias, confidence issues, unrealistic expectations, and elitist standards, as well as definitions of the word fluent that might be way too flexible. I don't think such fake understandings are useful for a mission with a specific target. The CEFRL system, with such conflicting ideas about what constitutes fluency, the system I rely on is a much more scientific and well-established language threshold criterion used by the major bodies that examine language levels in Europe, foundations like the Alliance. How to pronounce this? Alliance. Pompous. Alliance.
Alliance.
I got it. Yeah, I got it. I got it right. Foundation like the Alliance French. Wow, how how do you pronounce these words?
Alliance Francaise.
Alliance Francaise, the Institut Cervantes. What is this?
The Instituto Cervantes.
Cervantes, the Instituto Cervantes, and the Goethe Institute all use the Common European Framework of Reference for Language, CEFRL, a comprehensive guideline of language evaluation. This system uses standard terminology accepted across Europe and used by many institutions for Asian languages, even if not adopted by those countries formally for specific language levels. In the terminology, basically A means beginner, B means intermediate, and C means advanced. Each level is then split into lower 1 and upper 2. So upper beginner level is A2 and lower advanced level would be C1. The six levels on the scale, from the simplest to the most complex, are A1, A2, B1, B2, C, and C2. On this scale, an A level is what I would generally call a functional tourist, good enough to get by for basic necessities, or a beginner in various stages. C level implies mastery. You can work in the language exactly as you would in your native tongue and are effectively as good as a native in all ways, though you may still have an accent. In my mind, fluency starts at level B2 and includes all level above that and includes all levels above it, C1 and C2. More specifically, a person who reaches the B level on the CEFRL scale, relevant to the conversational aspect, is defined as someone who can interact with a degree of fluency and spontaneity that makes regular interaction with native speakers quite possible without strain for either party. This means that for a solid fluency goal, you should aim to participate in regular conversation without strain for either you or the people you are speaking with. That's regular conversations, not debates on 16th century French politics. For me, B2 fluency, at least in a conversational social context, implies that I can live my life in this language exactly as I would in English. I can go to any social event that I would typically go to in English and chat with natives without having them slow down for my benefit. I can discuss anything I would in English at a casual event, and natives can generally talk to me as they would with another native speaker. What it doesn't imply is also very important to consider. What it doesn't imply is also very important to consider. Hesitations are okay, and accents are fine. In fact, you can earn a C2 diploma with an accent, as long as it doesn't hinder communication. Also find at the B2 level is the inability to discuss some very complex topics. Realizing your limitation is essential because aiming for perfection is a fool's errand. You need to be realistic, but you can also aim for the milestone on your path of maybe someday mastering a language. There is never an end point at which you can say your work in learning the language is done. Even in my native language of English, I still encounter new words and aspects of other dialects I didn't know before. Learning a language can be a lifelong adventure, but the point is that you can reach certain stages within finite times when you have those stages well defined. Even if you don't agree with my specific definition of fluency, make sure your definition is as clear as possible and includes specific of what it is not. How much time do you need to reach fluency? Now, as you read previously, you can have a particular milestone in mind to aim for. Advanced beginner A2, conversational B2, fluent B2, mastery C2, or others. But here comes the big questions. How long does it take to get there? This book, of course, suggests This book, of course, suggests that you can become fluent in 3 months, but fluency won't be achieved if you don't do the work. You have to live up to your side of the bargain. You have to put in the time and stick to the plan. Also, the process requires a lot of strategic, mental, and emotional adjustments. It's very hard, for example, to realistically become fluent in 3 months if this is your first ever language learning project. Generally, I would recommend you aim for a conversational level B1 on the CEFRL scale or advanced beginner level A2 in 3 months. In the process, you'll discover tweaks you'll need to make to your learning approach in order for it to work best for you. If you succeed in learning one language to fluency over a longer period, then your approach may be ready for you to use in a shorter, say 3 months, period of time in your next language. An intensive language learning project demands your absolute focus. But if you're serious about learning a particular language, you will always make the time and give it several hours a day, even if you work full-time. Ultimately, languages are learned in hours, not months or years. It's not about the amount of time that passes from the moment you begin the project, but the amount of time you put into it. Whether or not your process adds up to a huge number of hours, the only thing worth counting is the time when you are 100% focused on learning, living, and using the language. To realistically expect to make good progress in a language in a short amount of time, you have to put at least 2 hours a day into it, and ideally more. As mentioned in the previous chapter, you can always make the time, even if it's a few minutes a day, to advance. But you have to set aside much more than scattered study sessions if you want to advance quickly. Do what it takes to create this time, avoid other side projects, and fill your language learning slot every day. If you just put a few hours a week into it, fluency in 3 months is indeed impossible. There's no magic fluency number either. You can't multiply 8 hours, the number of hours a day you would theoretically have available if you could work on the language full-time, by 90 days to figure out how long it will take you to learn a new language. You simply have to put in as much work as you can, as intensively as you can, with as much emphasis on solving immediate language problems as you possibly can in order to progress. If you do, you will quickly see how much time is necessary for you to advance to a higher level. So why am I so crazy about 3 months? The answer is incredibly simple. That's all the time I've had during many of my projects. When I would go to a new country to learn the language, the visa limit for tourists was about 3 months. Fortunately for me, that's the amount of time I usually like to spend in a foreign country before moving on to a new one. So I had only 3 months to reach my deadline. It's as simple as that. Even though I no longer go to a country to learn language, and now I prefer to learn in advance of traveling abroad, I have found that 3 months is as good a timeline as any. It's long enough to realistically aim for a high fluency goal, but short enough that the goal is always within sight, that 3-month deadline pressuring you to work harder. When we make resolution, such as a New Year's resolution with a vague deadline of learning a language within a year or to speak it fluently someday, even the best of us can get lazy. There are 7 days in a week, and someday is not one of them. When you give yourself a short deadline rather than thinking you have plenty of time, you tend to work as efficiently as possible. Deadlines of 1, 3, or 6 months are excellent for this reason. Even if you're more interested in a year deadline, break that year into smaller, achievable chunks. You don't have to pick 3 months for your major end goal. I've also had missions of conversational in 1 to 2 months and get by as a confident tourist in a few weeks, but my successes have more often been with a 3-month timeline. If 3 months feels right to you, Focus on one project and have an adventurous end goal. You don't have to pick fluency, but look at that CEFRL table, fee3m.com/CEFRL, and see which level would be enough of a challenge to truly push you, but still be realistic given the time you can put in. Wow, that's enough for today. Thank you. Bye-bye.